Okay, students, we have one more section that we have to read today together. So we're going to read this and I'll have some questions for you as well. The things that I want you to remember now, I want you to remember the map from yesterday and the location of Spain, the United States, and Cuba. So you could get out your note sheet right now if you don't already have it out and take a peek at that. And we're going to read some background about what was going on in Cuba and then how in the world the United States gets drawn into all of that. And then, of course, how it's connected to those newspapers, okay? So this is just kind of the introduction of what's going on in Cuba. So I'll go ahead and start reading. Trouble brewing, if I can read today, trouble brewing in Cuba. The island of Cuba, located in the Caribbean Sea, is a mere 90 miles off the coast of Florida. Oh, so it's pretty darn close. Look at that, 90 miles. In 1492, Christopher Columbus founded Cuba as a Spanish colony. The island later became one of the world's leading sugar producers, and hundreds of thousands of slaves worked on its plantations. For over 3 centuries, Cuba was part of Spain's vast empire. Yeah, we know that that's true. People from Cuba, their native language is Spanish, and that's how we can usually tell what European country colonized them. Next, it says, by the late 1800s, there were only 2 Spanish colonies left in the Americas, the islands of Puerto Rico and Cuba. A growing independence movement was now threatening Spanish rule in Cuba as well. So people in Cuba want independence from Spain. They're sick of being ruled by Spain. So Cubans struggle for independence. During the 1800s, many Cubans voiced a desire for self-rule. In 1868, a revolutionary group, largely made up of poor whites, free blacks, and slaves, demanded independence from Spain, the establishment of a republic, and the abolition of slavery. When Spain rejected these demands, bitter fighting ensued. Although the revolt was eventually crushed, Spain attempted to ease further tensions by agreeing to limited reforms, granting Cubans some representation in the government, and abolishing slavery in 1886. Meanwhile, American business interests viewed Cuba as a good place to trade and invest, and the island began to come under the United States' economic influence. By the mid-1890s, American business had invested millions of dollars in Cuba's sugar plantations, so American investors were therefore nervous about the island's political instability. Despite limited reforms, an uneasy political situation did not drastically improve, and Cubans rebelled again in 1895. Cuba's second struggle for independence was led by José Martí, a Cuban poet, journalist, and statesman. Forced to leave Cuba due to his revolutionary activities, Martí lived in the United States from 1881 to 1895. Even while abroad, Martí inspired his fellow Cubans with calls for liberty. He wrote, "Like bones to the human body, so is liberty the essence of life. Whatever is done without it is imperfect." Martí sailed to Cuba in 1895 to lead the revolt, but was soon killed in combat. Nevertheless, the rebellion continued. The Cuban rebels engaged in guerrilla warfare, launching surprise attacks against Spanish forces before retreating into the countryside. In 1896, Spain sent a new commander, General Valeriano Weyler, I hope I'm saying that right, to put down the uprising. To eliminate support for the rebels, Weyler forced tens of thousands of Cubans into concentration camps. Sounds like concentration camps from the Holocaust, doesn't it? Well, they're pretty similar. So these overcrowded, unsanitary prison camps provided little food or shelter, resulting in thousands of deaths from disease and starvation. Many Americans sympathized or felt bad about the rebellion, viewing Cuba's struggle for freedom similar to the American Revolution. That's when the Americans tried to get independence from Britain. Meanwhile, American investors feared that continuing political unrest put their Cuban investments and property at risk. Yes, we're selfish too. We want to preserve what's there because we're making money off of Cuba at the time. Despite public calls for the United States to intervene in Cuba, President Grover Cleveland followed a policy of strict neutrality. When William McKinley was elected president in 1896, he too hoped to maintain neutrality. However, neutrality would become increasingly difficult to sustain as public outcry for the United States to assist the rebels heightened. American newspapers react. Here we go. Here's how we get involved more. Most Americans learned about the events in Cuba by reading newspapers and magazines. So those were big sort of examples of mass media during that time period. At that time, those were really the only forms of mass media, methods of communicating to a mass audience. Today, our big one's probably social media, right? Back then, it's going to be newspapers. Newspapers were very popular in the late 1800s. However, with the trend of yellow journalism on the rise, remember, yellow journalism means exaggerating the news stories. Many publications were not careful in the accuracy of their reporting. No, they care about sales, so they want to make it so extreme that when people look at these newspapers and read the headlines, it's so ridiculous that they just can't help but reading it, okay? So, says here, publishers like Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst sensationalized, exaggerated the news to sell newspapers, and both the New York World and the New York Journal believed reporting on the Cuban Rebellion was an opportunity to gain new readers. So they're using that to try to get sales. Reporters and artists were encouraged to exaggerate the bravery of Cuban rebels and the horrors of Spanish rule. So they made Spain the enemy, especially Butcher Weiler's brutality. Many American readers were shocked by these reports, and some demanded that the United States assist Cuba in winning their independence. Thus, yellow journalism helped stir public support for U.S. intervention. So let's take a look at this cartoon down here. So this is an American political cartoon. So let's see what it says. So American political cartoons helped shape public opinion about the Cuban Rebellion. This cartoon from 1898 depicts the island suffering under Spanish misrule. The fearsome figure in the center, this guy here, is labeled Spain. See his belt? Spain. This guy here is shown stepping over a dead American sailor and onto a starving Cuban citizen. So we're going to find out what this USS Maine is all about. So that label is going to make more sense tomorrow. It's going to make a lot of sense tomorrow, but that's supposed to be an American sailor. Over here is just a Cuban citizen that's maybe been in that re-concentration camp. They're in Cuba. Up here, we've got the devil, right? It says over 500,000 innocent people starved to death by Spain. And look at Spain is called the devil's deputy. So he's doing the devil's work. Look at the blood dripping off of his knife. He kind of seems like Incredible Hulk-like with his shirt all ripped and like, you know. So those type of cartoons would be seen in the newspapers as well, which just got Americans even more upset. And we already know that the media is a very powerful thing. So it sways public opinion. All right, so now what you're going to do is go ahead and end the video here and go to Google Forms, okay? So there's the last link on Google Classroom where you'll answer some questions. Goodbye.